Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode, even today, of Vaughn Coleman Presents. I am, of course, your host, Vaughn Coleman, and today is a very special episode. I mean, every guest is special, but this guy I'm a big fan of. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are a big fan of. And without further ado, well, before I bring him on, I, of course, want to talk about my book. Some of you might be discovering me for the first time, through Bob. And I don't blame you. He's quite a big name. But ladies and gentlemen, if you like New Mutants, you're going to want to check out my comic book, Phenomenova. So Phenomenova is set 20 years after World War III and follows this teenage boy who was the son of a World War III veteran. And he is struck by lightning while holding this mysterious crystal and finds himself awakening with electricity powers and super speed. And so naively trying to be like the heroes that fought in the war, he suits up and becomes Galvanite, his own superhero, using a makeshift costume, and rushes into a nuclear reactor to stop a heist, but finds himself in way over his head, fighting villains way out of his league. This will be a 64-page comic book, and when you back it, which it will be launching March 22nd, and when you back it using the link, the sign-up link, you will be able to get an exclusive free trading card pictured here. We also just announced an art contest. All of the details will be on this sign-up page, so make sure you do that. Make sure you follow all the socials. That's rebeloasisstudios.com, or you could use the link that's in the description. That'll take you right here. So sign up if you're interested. But enough about me. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring in the great Bob McLeod. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So right off the bat, obviously, I'm a huge fan of your work. It was funny. The first stuff of your art I remember reading right here. I ended up, of course, buying it, getting, I think I got everyone on here. Did I get the letterer to sign? I might not have gotten the letterer, but I got basically everyone to sign this book. I remember this is, I think, the first time I saw your first pencils and inks, but I hadn't realized until I looked back that you had done some great. No, that's not true. You did a few issues of X-Men, right? Wasn't it 50?
I did 2 issues of the X-Men as fill-ins, and they actually offered me to be the regular penciler on the book after I did those couple issues. But then they just, also mentioned we've got this spinoff of the X-Men we're in the process of forming, and you could be co-creator on that book if you wanted instead. And I really wanted to draw the X-Men. The X-Men, successful book, everybody liked and was fun to draw. I had a good time doing those 2 issues. And this new project could just, maybe go down in a few months. Who knows if it was going to last or not. So very tough decision, but I went with the new project.
So what made you decide on going with the new project over X-Men? I'm just curious because that's quite a risk.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I figured when else am I going to get a chance to be co-creator on a new series for Marvel Comics? It's just those don't come along every day, So I figured I kind of had to risk it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it paid off. I mean, I've certainly given my share of signatures. I think I have every New Mutants issue I have signed by you at this point. But I mean, I loved it. Obviously, even all these years later, I mean, it's still like I read it for the first time a couple of years ago. I know the thing about the New Mutants too is outside of the comics, really. Most people don't know them, but they're so beloved by everyone that is a New Mutants fan, like loves these characters. And what I like about them too is that they each have a distinct look to them. They have the same costumes, the same uniform costumes, but everyone has a distinct face. Everyone has a distinct body type and whatever. So was that a big discussion you and Chris had when you were creating the New Mutants?
Not so much with Chris. That's just me. I was heavily influenced by Mort Drucker of Mad Magazine when I was growing up. So all of his caricatures and little individual quirks of his faces are what appealed to me. So when I was creating these characters, I didn't want them to look like Superman and Wonder Woman, traditional superhero faces. I wanted to make them look like you and me, just individual characters, individual people, with ordinary faces, basically, is what I was shooting for. Interesting faces, but not trying to make them necessarily beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, even then, like instantly it comes to mind, like Cannonball's face structure and his, the pronounced ears and everything. Everyone really just Roberto. I could just picture their faces, and I feel a lot of other artists that came after you kind of muted a lot of their characteristics, especially now. Cannonball, I often find, is drawn very plainly.
Yeah, the typical comic book artist has a more traditional, stereotypical way of doing hero faces. But I was never intending to be a superhero artist. I just like drawing figures, and like I said, I originally was going to be a humor artist, in the vein of Mort Drucker. So, I'm not your typical comic book artist. And after me, the other artists that came on, I feel, and I'm not putting them down. It's just a different tradition and a different way of looking at the job. But they lost a lot of that individuality you're talking about, and kind of stereotyped them a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a number of things, and again, I mean, New Mutants obviously had some very solid artists throughout the title, and then some that took it. And obviously, Bill Sienkiewicz is completely different from your style, but I mean, the groundwork. I like that your characters have like a look of they do look like real people, and it's like the right amount of cartoony. I remember being blown away. I don't know if it was just the graphic novel printing being different. I mean, I read it digitally, so I guess it wasn't that, but just the look of that New Mutants book. Like there was one particular panel where it was just it, and it was again wasn't even action shots necessarily, but it was her on the side of like a mountain, I believe, Danny. And I
Yeah.
was just like in awe. It was just like so beautiful. You would capture these quiet moments, and I think that's why the New Mutants resonated, is because they came from such normal tortured lives, and so they felt like real people that were just thrown into super heroic crazy situations.
Yeah, you have to give a lot of credit to Chris Claremont for that. He wanted these, like we talked about it a lot, but we wanted them to be, as if they just picked up random teenagers around the world, who happen to have these mutant powers. So, it was his idea to have her sitting on the mountain, but then I had to decide exactly what that would look like. Chris, when I was brought on board, Chris had already come up with some names. They weren't all nailed down, but he had some ideas for their names, some possibilities for their powers, but he didn't know quite how their powers would manifest. And, like we didn't know if they were going to have school uniforms or if the individual costumes, how many characters there would be in the group, how many boys, how many girls, all these decisions, we had to talk about and kind of nail down.
And was that a lot of push and pull? Like, how much of it, like, were there certain characters that you came up with more than Chris, or vice versa? Like,
No, Chris had definite characters ready to go. They weren't looking for me to bring my idea of characters in, and I wasn't looking to do that either. I'm an artist, I'm leaving that creativity in that respect up to Chris, but he's not an artist and didn't know how to make them. He had them in his mind, but how would an artist interpret what he had in mind? And so I had to come up, and we talked about, like, for instance, Sunspot. Would he grow big like the Hulk when he used his powers, or would he stay small? We ended up keeping him small because we already had a Hulk.
mm-hmm.
And he left Cannonball pretty much up to my design. He didn't have any particular look for Cannonball, and I was thinking, well, he's a coal miner. kind of a hillbilly type character. So I'm going to make him kind of look a little awkward, a little gawky looking. Not that all coal miners but be like that, but compared to someone like Superman, I think in my mind they were leaning more in that direction. So I kind of gave him big ears and made him just look a little uncomfortable in his skin at that age, and in that respect.
It's great. It's so interesting. Just hearing all these little details about it. And when it came to like the braids or even Wolfsbane's hair, was that Chris's idea or was that her
I
fur-like
don't
hair?
think so. I don't remember Chris giving me any directions on their specific attributes. I was trying to make her look somewhat reminiscent of a wolf. So I got some pictures of wolves, and they had these little kind of spiky hair with the little markings in it. So I just gave her a little spiky hair, similar to one of the photos I found, and tried to give her a lower hairline, so she's a little more closer to an animal, little things like that.
I loved that. Again, it was always very distinct. And so even though a lot of these characters, obviously, if you pull, I mean, there's been so many New Mutants #1s, even though a lot of them have changed a lot, the designs that they came from, even when the costumes and some other aspects change, you can always recognize these characters for the most part because there's just like some core iconography. Do you find that certain artists represent your work better than others? or no?
Not so much. I mean, I didn't pay that much attention to the artists that came after me. Of course, Bill Sienkiewicz took it in such a different direction.
Yeah, I'm sure you must have been surprised when this.
Well, I knew Bill's work, but he was in the process of creating this style kind of around the time that he took on the series, and he wanted to do something totally original looking. And I don't know if you were around, how old you were at the time. You might have not even been born back then, but it was a shock to the fans when Bill came on the book.
I wasn't, but I do remember even when I was reading through, it's like you turn from one page and then boom, completely different.
Yeah, a lot of fans hated it when he started, and then a lot of fans loved it. It was a big split in how his style was received. But the fans grew to accept it and like it. And the artists who came after him, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a typical comic artist, and they tended to be more typical. So I don't think they were trying to mimic my look of the characters all that much. I think they were just trying to do the best job they could with what they had to go on.
Marcus Calgrew in the chat said it was a shock. I was in college, so there you go. That's a shocked reaction. Yeah. I find it interesting that because I had heard you mention this before, that you weren't interested in superheroes or standard comic books for that matter when you came in. You were more interested in Mad Magazine and doing comedy strips. Is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to be a humor artist, maybe have my own newspaper comic strip, maybe work for Mad Magazine. My very first job at Marvel was actually a satire of the movie Westworld for Marvel's Crazy magazine. So I started my career doing what I intended to do. But then, everyone I was meeting in New York at the time, everyone in the business was way more into these dramatic comics than humor. And when I tried to get work on one of the color, dramatic comics, I got rejected. So I wanted to prove to them that I could do that as well as humor. But because I had never thought about it before then and never really studied all that, I had a lot to learn. I had to learn more realistic anatomy and storytelling and camera angles and dramatic poses and all this stuff you have to know how to do to draw comics. I hadn't really studied. I was just trying to draw funny figures. So I had a lot of catching up to do.
Did you go to school for art or?
I did. I went to college, Auburn University, and majored in their art program for a year. And my teachers were actively discouraging me from doing cartooning. And I just wanted to be some kind of cartoonist. I didn't want to be a fine artist.
Right.
I didn't want to be a painter. So I didn't feel that was the right fit for me. So I lasted 4 quarters. There was 3 quarters in a typical year. So 4 quarters, and then I quit. And a little bit later went to an art school. And the art school had a cartooning class, but then when we got in the class, they just said, well, we're going to focus on color in this class. And here's a book on cartooning. And it was a book from the 40s or 50s, a really old book. And I didn't really see anything in that I was, that taken with. So I learned a little bit about color. But again, I didn't feel like I was learning much in that school. So I ended up quitting there after a year. And I just, I figured I'd have to teach myself.
Wow. So no one could get you. No one could get it right, but you got it. You somehow got it. So that's good. So did you think? Did you ever end up coming back to doing the strips you wanted to do, like the comedic stuff, or?
Yeah, sure. I kept working for Crazy Magazine. I did a few more movie satires for them. One of Apocalypse Now, one of the Black Hole movie. I did a Star Wars Empire Strike Back satire. And then I took over this strip called Teen Hulk that Marie Severin had been working on, and had a great time doing that. And that I was doing that into the 80s. I started in 1974, so about 10 years I was still doing the humor stuff.
Wow, that's and somehow managing, because your listed titles to your name is so many. I know it's weird because I know you as a penciler, but correct me if I'm wrong. You've done more inking, right?
Yeah, my inking I was actually started in the production department at Marvel, just doing lettering corrections.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I went up to New York trying to start my career and got rejected over and over and over, and was getting nowhere. I met Neil Adams, who at
Oh
that
boy.
time was like at the pinnacle of comic artists. Everybody respected him. And I went to see him. I showed him my samples, and he said, "Well, what do you want?" And I said, "Anything that pays," because I was, really, I was broke. I was about to call my parents for bus money to go back home to Tampa. And so he picked up the phone and got me this job in the production department at Marvel just on his recommendation. So I started there. A couple days later doing lettering corrections, worked my way up to art corrections a couple months later. And it was a great way to start because I was right there in the Marvel office with all the editors, and I could keep showing them my samples as I was progressing. And all of the best artists' work came across my desk to have art corrections and lettering corrections done. And I could study John Buscema's pages, everybody's pages. And so I was learning pretty quickly. And right there in the production department, a longtime inker, Mike Esposito, was sitting next to me on one side. Frank Giacoya, another longtime inker, was sitting next to me on the other side. And we would talk. And Mike one day said, you could learn to be an inker a lot faster than you learn to be a penciler. And I had never really thought about them as different occupations and different skills, or, I was just learning how to be a comic artist. But I said, yeah, I'll try inking. So I started doing some backgrounds for Mike, did backgrounds for Al Milgram and Klaus Janson. And month or two later, I started getting my own inking work. And so my inking career kind of took off way before my penciling, because like I said, I had a lot to learn about penciling. So I didn't get this was 1974. I didn't get my first penciling job on a color comic until 1979, 5 years later.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, but it sounds to me like so. I had been given this advice just in general across every industry that the best way to learn often is just to become a cog in the machine and then start studying the machine. And it sounds to me like that's, I mean, lettering correction. So did you do any notable comics even when you were in the lettering department that you maybe weren't credited for?
I was taught how to hand letter by the two letterers in the office there who they designed all the titles for all the comics. The logos on the cover, Danny Crespi and Maury Koromoto. And I so I learned how to letter, and I ended up lettering a few comics over the next few years. But I didn't really want to be a letterer. I like
Right.
lettering, but I was trying to learn the whole package, to be penciling, lettering, inking, coloring, everything. I didn't care so much about writing because there was so much involved in the artwork that was, taking up all of my attention pretty much. And because I had never been planning to be a comic artist, if I wrote something, it was probably going to be more in the humor line. So I was so busy drawing, I didn't really think too much about writing, but still had a lot to learn. But I didn't. Actually, the first comics I worked on outside of humor was the black and white kung fu magazines that Marvel had at the time.
Oh wow, was that Shang-Chi or was that?
Yeah, Hands of Shang-Chi, Iron Fist. Seems like there was another one, but whatever. I did some ink jobs for that. I did pencil one job. I did, I think, 3 pages filling in one of their black and white magazines, and I got credit, but I was just doing 3 pages out of a whole story that was penciled by another artist. Um, so it kind of went unnoticed. I don't know. I don't even know why they gave me that. I think just because I was there and handy, and they needed them in a hurry because I was unproven. It was my first year in the business, and suddenly they were having me pencil and ink these pages in a dramatic comic. So I did those, and they got printed. I forget the name of the magazine they were in. Marvel Premiere, maybe, one of their black and white magazines.
Wow, that's really crazy. And it seems to me, I mean, it seems to me like you've touched so many titles since then. I mean, you started from lettering department and now suddenly you're doing all of this. I know your first inking job was in the Kung Fu stuff, or where did you move from
Yeah,
there?
I did some kung fu jobs. I think I was maybe George Perez's first inker when he
Oh,
started
I
his
didn't know
career.
that.
We started around the same time. He did a Shang-Chi job, or an Iron Fist,
Wow.
one of those.
What was he
And
like
then,
to work with?
pardon?
Because I'm also you're up there. George Perez is also up there in my. What was George like to work with?
George is a super nice guy. At that time, everybody pretty much was just working through the editor.
Hmm.
So I wasn't. It's not like George and I were in a room working together.
Right.
I had met George, but he just turned in his pages to the editor, and the editor handed the pages to me, and we didn't communicate or anything. So I don't even know what he thought about my inking. Later on, I inked him a lot, so I guess he liked my inking. But at that time, we weren't discussing it. Same with pretty much every job that I worked on. A lot of the times, I didn't even know the penciler if I was inking. Might not have known the inker if I was penciling, doing the penciling. Um, it's just the way they did it. Everything was through the editor at that time.
Gotcha. So with Craven's Last Hunt, then did you not really talk to Mike Zeck much?
Well, that's a different situation. Mike and I were friends. We also started at the same time, and he liked my inking, and I became friends with him and visited him at his house once when he was working on Secret Wars. Um, he just offered Craven's Last Hunt to me because he thought I would be a good fit. I had already inked a lot of stuff over him, fill-ins on Spider-Man and what have you, some covers. Um, so he was pretty confident that I could give him what he was looking for in the inks on that series.
Here's Niall Scala. He's saying it's good to see you. Yeah, I got my there we go. I got see that's another one I got you to sign right here. I this was one of the first ones I remember when I was first getting into comics, and I was like the most essential comics to read, and this is always up there, and for good reason. It's great, and it's interesting. I mean, now that when I look at it again, like I totally see, even though it's definitely Mike Zeck, I totally see your influence like in the inks and just the way the final art comes out.
Well, when Mike was doing that, he started out doing really tight pencils. He did all the covers first, and super tight pencils for him on the covers, and very detailed. And then the first 3 issues he did finish pencils, but then I don't know if he got busy with other projects or for what reason exactly, but he started doing breakdowns. So with breakdowns, the pencils were pretty bare bones, and I was able to add a lot more of my style in the last 3 issues. But I was, keeping the same look that we had in the first 3.
I need to reread this, but looking back through it now, I mean, I totally see the New Mutants and just like the realism that came through, especially in that first graphic novel. I totally see in a lot of Craven's face and everyone's faces. And I'm wondering, because this is such, I mean, going from comedy strips to probably one of the darkest Spider-Man stories ever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite the jump. I mean, you drew, so how much of the, for example, a spoiler for this, one of the greatest comics ever, how did you, when you drew that scene where Craven ends his life, how much of that was you and how much of that was Mike Zeck?
That was breakdowns at that point. But, Mike had already established Craven's look. So I wasn't making any major changes. The thing about breakdowns is you're just adding, you're just building on it. You're not necessarily changing very much. So he would just basically give me a very bare bones outline drawing, and I would add all the lighting and the rendering. So the lighting on those last 3 issues is just totally my ideas. In the first 3, it's more of Mike's idea, and I wouldn't always follow Mike exactly, but I like Mike's art, and I would usually pretty much give him what he gave me.
I mean, even as I'm looking at it, I'm seeing this. It's been way too long since I've read this. I'm gonna have to go back, but man, I mean, that's so interesting. Did you have a favorite page or a favorite issue of the bunch or favorite part to ink?
I really had fun down in the sewers with Vermin.
Oh, Vermin is so gross. I love him.
Yeah, the pages with him are probably among my favorites.
Why is that? I'm just curious because there's so many iconic things about this story.
I always liked doing secondary characters more than the heroes. So Spider-Man's fun to draw, but anything that moves away from human and becomes a little more cartoony is probably more up my alley. So Vermin's really this kind of half human, half creature, half animal creature. So it was just fun making him hairy and creepy looking.
Yeah, I mean, he feels, despite him being so key in one of the most important Spider-Man stories, he doesn't get talked about much, but in this story, I mean, if he had been created in the 60s, I don't think he would have been as effective. I mean, the way he's so literally just having him in the muck, the way he's drawn and all the grit that you guys have in here, it gives such a different, unforgettable feel. It almost doesn't, it really feels more like a monster from like I don't even know if I'd say Universal, probably darker than that, but like a monster movie more than it does, a comic book villain, which I love.
Yeah, we've been waiting for them to make a movie of it. I think it'd make a fun movie.
I think everyone has. And I don't know about fun. I mean, I have fun, but it would be, I mean, they'd have to seriously be like, listen, leave the kids might not want to see that one. But I mean, man, that story is unforgettable.
Believe it or not, I've had people tell me that was the very first comic they ever read.
It was
You know,
up
like
there for me. It was
when they
really
were like 9 years old. That's pretty heavy comic for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, I was in middle school, so I was just kind of in my edgier phase. So it struck me at the right time. I was in my angsty phase, so it was right up my alley. But so Mike Zeck, I guess, was a friend of yours. And now, what about? I know you've inked so many runs. I'm curious about, especially because I have some fans of his in the chat. When he worked with Dale Keown on the Hulk, did you get to talk to him much?
Not when I worked on it. I met him later at a convention in Canada. So when I was working on the Hulk, I don't think I had met him or talked to him at all. They just, offered this series to me, and it looked like really fun stuff. So I was excited to start working on it, and had a great time inking him. Always enjoyed his work.
Yeah, and so you met him after the fact then.
Yeah, I was at a convention in Canada, and we were on a panel together. I think is where I met him.
Yeah, I mean his stuff is, I mean, unbelievable. His Hulk, and was that your first time working on the Hulk, or had you worked on him prior to that?
No, I had worked on the Hulk before. Who was the first one I worked on? I don't know. I had been I had done a Sal Buscema Hulk was probably my first.
Mm-hmm.
On the Defenders, maybe where I first inked him over Sal. I don't remember. And then some earlier issues of the Hulk. A couple years before that, I had inked over a different penciler. Blanking on his name right now. I'll think of it in a second.
Let's see.
Oh, Stephen Geiger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's great. These are it's so interesting just seeing all these pencilers. So I didn't know this, that inkers, because I guess it really was so corporate structures, because we always see your names right next to the penciler. And so at least for me as a fan, I'm like, oh, they must have just been like buddies. And I guess that's just not the case. You don't.
I mean, in later years, became a little more common. I don't, maybe because of the internet, people could FaceTime and see each other, and the convention circuit started up and they'd see each other at conventions. But back in the 70s and early 80s, there weren't that many conventions, and everybody lived in different places. So there were a lot of artists that I never met, that I worked with. And I think that was pretty common.
Wow. Crazy. But of the ones you did work with, I know you mentioned some of the ones that kind of mentored you. Who did you work most closely with over the years? I know you worked mostly in Marvel. I know you did some DC stuff as well. Were there any that you were close with?
I don't even know if I worked mostly at Marvel. I did kind of almost as much probably at DC as I did at Marvel.
Oh.
But probably Mike Zeck was the one I worked most closely with, as far as inking another penciler. Joe Rubenstein and I met up at Neil Adams' studio, Continuity Studios. I got a desk up there and met him, and we would criticize each other's inking and help each other learn how to ink. But as far as working with somebody, I would probably say Mike Zeck.
All right. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, his stuff is obviously, your work on Craven's Last Hunt with him is unforgettable. I mean, there's so much stuff that you've had a hand in so many different franchises. I mean, looking at it, Star Wars, Superman. Did you have, even though I know you wanted to do more comedic strips and ended up ironically working the darkest Spider-Man story probably ever, did you have any favorites that you like, any favorites across your career that you worked on, any favorite stories, or even ones that you don't think are talked about enough?
As a kid, I was reading the Superman line of comics and Archie's and the Harvey line of like Richie Rich and Wendy the Good Little Witch and that kind of stuff when I was younger. Um, I missed the whole Marvel Revolution in the 60s. I was reading Mad Magazine then, so I didn't see any of that stuff almost, until I got in the business. So Superman has a nostalgic feeling for me. I felt like it was kind of an honor to draw Superman because I had read him so much as a kid.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed my time on Superman. My work I did for Crazy Magazine, of course. The New Mutants were a lot of fun. Those are probably my top three.
That's really great. That's so cool. I mean, again, yeah, Superman, I imagine, must be like super intimidating. I mean, he's literally, I think, outside of the Christ on the cross, that's like one of the most iconic symbols in the world. So just be handed that, no
I was
pressure.
actually working on Dale Keown's Hulk. I was up at the office turning in a Hulk job that I had inked over Dale, and Jerry Ordway, who was one of the pencilers on Superman at the time, came up to the office and saw me there and said he always enjoyed my penciling, and why wasn't I doing more penciling? And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I kind of just take what comes along, and I'm having a good time inking Dale here." And he said, "Well, we're looking for another penciler on Superman. Would you want to take a shot at drawing Superman?" And I said, "Well, sure." So, so I went over and talked to the editor and did kind of a tryout job on Superman, and they liked it. And so then I started penciling Superman. And a lot of people have asked me if I was intimidated drawing Superman. Probably I should have been, but I've always just been kind of overconfident, even when I was awful starting out and didn't know anything. I've always been very confident. And so I knew I could do a good job on Superman. And it just was excited to do it.
Wow. Well, Marcus Kelvgrew says you did a great job on Superman. That confidence is great too. I mean, you earned it. You instantly made. You were given these nobody characters and made them instantly recognizable. I mean, throughout your career, like there was stuff where I'd read the New Mutants. I'd go back. Like you even inked I think one of the most underrated X-Men storylines, which was it was, what was it? Annual 4, the Nightcrawler's Inferno, the one where
Over John Romita Jr.?
yes, I love that issue. That is one of my that's, I think, one of the most underrated X-Men stories ever. And obviously you killed. Was that your first X-Men work? Or
Was that before X-Men 94?
I believe
Because that was pretty early on. I think that might have been my first.
Wait, you did X-Men 94?
Yeah, I inked it over Dave Cockrum.
Oh no, never mind. That was that. Wow, I didn't even. Hold on a second. Wow,
Yeah,
I
because that was
didn't realize that.
74, I think, and that annual wasn't until much later.
I totally forgot you were there that early in the run. Wow, that's great. Yeah, that. I mean,
Another job where I just can't believe they gave it to me because I had just started my inking career, and that was a major new X-Men title. Um, you know, I guess everybody else was busy. I don't know why they gave me that job, but
wow.
you
Yeah.
know,
All right. Again, now I see it right away. Yeah, that's. I mean that. So you've been working with since I didn't realize that. So you and Chris started X-Men on the same. So you started from Chris's first X-Men book. So are you good friends with Chris then?
we are now. Yeah, I mean, back then I barely knew Chris. Not even sure I had met him at that point. But he actually wrote the very first color comic that I worked on penciling that I mentioned before. It was a Marvel team up featuring the Guardian of the Galaxy Marvel Team Up 86.
Oh, that's cool.
So he wrote that job, and then he wrote the X-Men issues that I penciled, and of course the New Mutants.
So what was it like working with Chris as a writer, or like as an artist, a penciler? Because obviously inker, it seems to me like you're more distant from that.
Yeah. Chris has always been very easy to work with. You know, in the beginning on the New Mutants plots, he would write a very detailed plot, and he was giving me so much stuff I couldn't fit it into the comic. And so I said, look, you know, in order for this to look decent, I'm going to have to edit some stuff out. And he said, oh, that's okay. I'd rather give you too much than too little.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So
was
very
that
nice
fun
of
for
him.
you, or
And,
was that
you
a pain?
know, we always got along fine.
That's good to hear it. Yeah, I wonder because he worked with such a wide variety of artists, and seems to me like he's on good terms with quite a few of them. So that's always good to hear. Wow, you bought X-Men 94 off the newsstand. That's crazy. I mean, that must be worth. I can't even imagine how. I think no, I can actually. It's definitely. I want to say a couple thousand. I think it's. I've seen it at cons.
Let's not talk about that because all my copies of that book got destroyed when my basement flooded.
Oh my God, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. Wow. I've seen horror stories like that. Man. But that's so you've worked on, I mean, so many different titles, drawn so many different characters. Are there any characters that because you've drawn like everyone, that you find more difficult to draw than others? Or that
Yeah, sure. I mean, what's difficult is the costumes. So if they've got a really complicated costume, or a costume that doesn't have easily defined anatomy, like Firestorm. He has his billowy sleeves, and he's got this mask on. Iron Man, you know. I'm so glad Bob Layton had Iron Man instead of me, because I would have hated drawing Iron Man month after month. Just nothing but armor, and instead of a figure. I like drawing figures.
So you prefer, so the New Mutants was a good fit for you then.
Perfect fit for me, yeah.
So
I was so lucky to be there at the right place at the right time to get that series.
So are there any characters that you drew that you just dreaded drawing?
Galactus.
I've heard that. I've heard a lot of people. And it's funny. I remember one of the first comic conventions where I was really into comics and not just kind of a casual fan, that I was walking by. I overheard conversations between a couple artists that were like, "Oh, I have to draw Galactus." Like, at least you're not drawing Hawkman. Those are the two that I heard were like.
Well, I'm someone who likes drawing the costume the way it was designed to look. So if you're just going to make up your own Galactus costume, fine. But if you wanted to look like Jack Kirby or John Buscema's Galactus, he's got all these little things that have to look just so that you got to keep looking at the reference to see exactly what he looks like. So it's kind of a pain in the neck, you know, as opposed to Superman. Everybody knows what Superman looks like.
Right.
He's much easier as far as that goes. His face is tough. He has to have a certain look to his face.
I've heard that he's a deceptively simple, because he has to have like a friendly. You have to make sure he has like a friendly face, or how would you describe it? A strong,
friendly face. And I don't like giving him a nose that I don't feel is his nose, you know, for example. So, you know, again, going back to Mad Magazine and caricatures, I think everyone has a distinctive nose and a distinctive jawline and eyes and whatever. So I like to draw certain characters to look a certain way.
That's great. So Superman is, you would say, a harder to draw in the face than the costume.
Yes, sure.
And when you differentiate, because I know, for example, Frank Quitely would he makes Clark Kent kind of slouch over and his jaw kind of like different. When you were drawing Clark Kent versus Superman, did you have a different way of differentiating the characters in terms of posture or something, or was it just Superman with glasses?
Subconsciously, I think when I was drawing him in costume, I would try to make him look super, just really the ideal superhero. Whereas when I was drawing him as Clark, he was just a big uh, guy in a suit, So I didn't make him slouch or anything. But I definitely, and as you're drawing these characters, they're in your head as people. And so I'm imagining him as Clark Kent, not as Superman.
Wow. That's, yeah. I mean, it's just interesting seeing the differences between the two and how different artists can really just redefine the same characters, but staying true to the core. I mean, is always really important. What I wonder is, of the 5 New Mutants that you created, did you have a favorite either to draw or just as a character?
I mean, I had fun with Cannonball with his big ears. I always liked drawing Danny Moonstar. I think she's fun to draw. Sunspot, I try when I draw his face, I like drawing him, but when he's Sunspot, not so much. Just a silhouette basically. Um, and Rain, I try to make her just cute and lovable looking. So I enjoy drawing all of them in different reasons, for different reasons.
That's, yeah. They're all. I forgot. Yeah, Karma was, who was that? Frank Miller that created Karma, I think, and like because she appeared before.
She was before the New Mutants. Yeah, it might have been Frank. I'm not sure who designed her.
I think it was some Fantastic Four annual or something like that, I believe. I know when you've revisited New Mutants after you initially left the title and did that annual, right here. By that point, there had been a few new additions to the team. You had Magic. You had Magic. You had Magma. You had Cypher, and you had Warlock. Did you have a favorite of those to draw? I know, was Warlock, because you were the first artist after Sienkiewicz to draw Warlock, right?
Was I?
I think so. How did you manage? Because he's such an abstract character. How did you manage to draw a character like that in your style?
I mean, my style is so different from Bill Sienkiewicz's style, and that's a pure Sienkiewicz character,
Right.
So I did him a little more structured, a little more, as a figure instead of a just alien. That Bill was doing really sketchy stuff
Right.
when he was on the New Mutants. So his Warlock is very sketchy and quick, whereas mine was a little more thinking about the details. But that's just the difference in our styles.
Right.
I basically hated drawing Warlock.
Really?
Yeah, he's not my kind of character, unless I just go totally cartoony with him and just have fun with him as a cartoon. But I didn't really know quite what to do with him.
Yeah, I mean, you somehow made it work, but I mean, I remember because it's such a surprise seeing him from your more realistic looking style versus his more experimental style. And so it was almost like you get a completely different look at the character, and like this is how he operates. Like when he turns into, hold on, let me see if I could. When he turns into where is it? Right here, and he just kind of, you can't, the pages are bending, but he just kind of transforms to hold up the amp. Like that kind of stuff is so interesting. It's so different. Did you like, I guess, because the other characters, there was Magic and there was Magma. Did you like drawing Magma?
Sure. She was just basically a simple female figure with flaming hair and whatever. And of course, Magic is fun to draw. She's very well designed.
Mm-hmm.
I did not create her, though. I'm not sure who created Magic for her.
It's a complicated, for her costume, yeah, because that was a complicated question, because it was like Cockrum technically because she was just the little sister, and then they aged. So it's like so many different people
Yeah,
are.
but as far as her classic look, I'm not sure who came up with that.
The hairline. I'm not sure, but that was another thing you did, and that I feel like whether conscious subconsciously or not continued after you was every character had a distinctive hair is what I noticed with the New Mutants. So even after you left and they were creating new characters, I feel like they maybe subconsciously kept that trend. Like Magma and Magic are both blonde girls, right? But you can tell instantly the difference
Yeah.
because one has super curly hair, one has blonde hair. So that way, even if they have the same costumes, they always look different from each other.
Yeah,
And
so if I was drawing Magma and Magic, I would try to give them different faces as well. Um, and you've got to go for standard pretty girl, so it's difficult. Um, you have to be kind of careful what you do with female faces. Um, I don't know.
why is that? I'm just curious.
It's there's this traditional idea of what beauty is.
Hmm.
So if you're drawing a superhero female, especially in those days, currently now it's become more broad. There's a broader interpretation of beauty in the comics, but at that time it was pretty stereotypical.
Hmm.
Um, so you didn't want to vary too far, make their nose too big or whatever. Like in the current miniseries of the New Mutants that I've seen, they gave Danny uh, a longer, bigger nose. So I tried to give her what I considered a Native American nose, kind of a straight nose. But I still wanted her to be my idea of pretty.
Hmm.
I don't think current females are going for that same classic stereotypical pretty girl look,
Right.
which is a good thing. They're getting some different looks, which is good.
So you like the newer directions? Do you feel that there's like less restrictions now then, and that it's
Yeah,
on there?
sure. Yeah, definitely.
That's great. That's really cool. And I know another character that appeared in this annual that you did was what was her name? Lila Cheney.
Yeah, before we get into Lina, let me just mention, it's just kind of the same with guys. There was this stereotypical hero. When I created Cannonball, there was a lot of pushback, people saying, well, these are ugly superheroes. Why isn't Cannonball better looking? And I didn't want him to be better looking. I wanted him to be kind of average and gawky looking. And as soon as I left the book and other people took over, he got more and more better looking.
Yeah.
Sunspot got taller, Wolverine got taller. People have a hard time in comics. Artists have a hard time seemingly drawing someone who's not your
Good
typical
looking.
hero.
Which is what funny because your background was so not that. It was really so. Was it? Did you find yourself feeling very restricted then in terms of faces?
No, I would just do whatever face I thought they should have. I was very lucky with the editors I worked with. I got very little criticism. I guess if they didn't like something I did, they didn't give me more work. But I don't remember hardly ever getting any critiques where they said, "Oh, we want you to do this instead," or we didn't like the way you did this.
So so you had good editor experiences. That's always nice that you didn't feel like you were necessarily forced creatively to do certain things.
Well, also, starting in the production department, I saw all the best artists and what they were doing, and I met all the editors, and so I pretty quickly learned what the editors were looking for.
Gotcha.
And when I started going freelance and doing my own drawings, I knew what they wanted.
Right. That makes sense. And then you seem to consistently get work. And I mean, again, and it speaks to yourself. It's hard not to go through a lot of comic book runs and not find your name at least somewhere, especially for a few decades. I mean, you're all over X-Men, Spider-Man, Superman. I mean, everything. G.I. Joe, I know you've done. I mean,
I was
Star
just going to
Wars.
mention G.I. Joe. I inked a lot of covers over Mike Zeck on G.I. Joe.
Wow, yeah, you used to work with Mike a lot. That's great. Did you have a favorite cover that you inked? Didn't you even ink Frank Miller Daredevil? Some Frank Miller Daredevil
Not
stuff?
Daredevil. I inked Frank on his first job at Marvel. It was a John Carter
Oh,
Mars job.
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Frank started out pretty raw. Got much better quickly, but I inked a couple jobs on him before he got on Daredevil. There was a Marvel 2-in-1 that I inked. Has kind of, at the time, I don't know if it's still remembered, but there was a poker game uh, sequence in it that Frank drew and I inked.
Wow, I would have never. I had no idea because I guess I just know him like his early stuff, Daredevil, but I had no idea that you inked his first Marvel work. Wow, you said it was a lot rougher at the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was doing very interesting things with his storytelling and his. He would put in interesting lighting. He wasn't skilled enough at that point to really carry off the lighting completely. So I would kind of take his idea and run with it because I had already had a lot of more experience at that point um, than he had, and I knew how to really finish up the look of a comic, whereas he was still learning and was concentrating a lot more on just the storytelling and the figure posing and the camera shots and what have you, rather than the finish.
Yeah, I mean his that's what I think people know him best for is just the camera shots and the panel structures and everything was so even just looking back at it so different from everything else. I do have a question. So someone said, "Are you a fan of Little Annie Fanny?" Is that
Yeah, that's a comic strip from Playboy magazine.
oh
And Little Annie Fanny was drawn by an artist named Will Elder. Fantastic humor artist. Um, Jack Davis, longtime Mad Magazine artist, comic artist, worked on Little Annie Fanny. Frank Frazetta actually did a little bit of work on Annie Fanny. So I always just, loved the work, the artwork on it. The writing was, Playboy magazine sexiness, silliness, very sexist stuff, but incredible artwork.
there we go. And then someone, a few New Mutants questions. Asked Bob who his least favorite New Mutant is.
I would say probably Warlock.
Warlock. Well, that leads into this question. LUCG for my PP says, "Hails, Mr. McLeod. Your work is a part of my '80s childhood. How fun or not was it to ink Warlock?"
Yeah, it's difficult to do him. It's a lot of black. You're inking these geometric shapes, and his hair is kind of an issue. He's not an easy character unless you get real sketchy like Bill Sienkiewicz does with him.
So he's a tough one to draw. Then I always wondered that he seemed like, again, I mean, following up Sienkiewicz with anyone else's style. I mean, that's a tough act to follow. But
Yeah, unless I'm gonna try to do really sketchy like Bill does, I think it'd be pretty easy to do him. But to do him more toward my style was tough.
got it. That's interesting. Yeah, it's just funny that some people are curious to how because you set a look, and then here comes Bill, and he throws this wild ball, and you have to pick it back up. I'm trying to remember. Did you do any other New Mutants after that point, after the annual? I know you did some covers.
Yeah, I did. an issue over John Byrne, actually. Was it issue
That's
number
right. 75, right?
75? Yeah.
Yeah, that was an
Um,
iconic
I
issue.
also did a mini series. I inked a mini series over Al Rio.
Hmm. When was that?
New Mutants Forever, I think it was called.
Oh, okay.
That was in the 2000s, I believe.
And then I know you also did that 30th anniversary homage cover.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I'm looking at all this. So this has been great. I mean, I've loved just hearing you talk about all of this. Um, I know that there's, let's see, Byrne is the man. Yeah, did you get to, so did you work with John personally at all or not really?
Um, I inked John on Marvel Team Up 100, I think it was, a little backup story with the Black Panther and Storm. Then I inked that New Mutants issue with him, and seems like one other thing. I don't remember. He was fun to ink.
Yeah, that sounds like it was fun. I mean, again, you've worked with like so many great artists, and then on top of that, you've the pencils you've done, the characters you've created, everything is great. In all your years of comics, were there any characters that you really wanted to get to? I know you said you wanted to do Mad Magazine stuff that you weren't able to get to, or did you have any dream jobs that you finally got after years that blew you away? I know Superman obviously was a huge.
I would have really enjoyed penciling Howard the Duck.
Howard the Duck. Oh, that's. I didn't even think of that. That's perfect for you.
Yeah, I inked a couple issues over Mike Golden on him, and I did one over Gene Colan, but I never got to pencil him. So that would have been fun to do for me. Um, I feel like I did pretty much everything I wanted to do in comics. I don't feel like I missed out on anything. Like you
That's
say, I
good.
got to work on all the major characters. So I'm pretty happy with everything I was able to do in my career.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean that's such a great answer, and glad you were able to. I do have to ask because I work with Michael Golden at conventions and stuff. I'm not sure if you've ever seen me do it. What was it like working with him on Howard the Duck?
Again, I wasn't
Oh, right.
working with Mike at the time. I had no contact with him, but I loved working on his pencils. I had a great time. I was into airbrush at the time, so I did a lot of airbrush work on those jobs. One where he goes back to Duck World, and a little one about where he was like this duck vampire. So it was a lot of fun, and he was giving me breakdowns. So I always preferred inking breakdowns because I could take over more and add more of myself on it. Um, so Mike's breakdowns are complete complete drawing as a simple outline. He doesn't put any lighting in or any rendering in, but he gives you a very nailed down drawing. And he's such a good artist. Um, it's very easy to build on his breakdowns. So I always enjoyed working on his breakdowns.
That's
My
great.
favorite, you didn't mention Conan the Barbarian. My
Oh,
favorite artist ink was John Buscema, and I did a few issues of Conan the Barbarian over John, and a few covers and different things. Tarzan covers I inked over him. Um, Most of that was breakdowns, and again, he gives you such a good foundation to build on. It was a lot of fun.
that's so cool, man. Buscema. I mean, again, that's another one, another title, another artist. Buscema. I'm trying to think because I'm going through. I know you've done so much. You did Batman too. You did.
I did a lot of inking over George Perez, Ron Wagner. Um, um, a lot. So many people. Um, what was I just going to say besides Conan? I don't know. There's there's too many series. Star Wars. I was penciling with Tom Palmer inking, and Tom was my favorite inker. So that was a nice experience too.
Wow. I mean, it's easy to understand why you feel fulfilled in your career when you've had the resume that you've had. I mean, this is wow. You just narrowly missed Spider-Man 300, huh? Looks like that.
Well, that's a story I don't know if I want to get into right now.
I can have you back.
Another time I'll tell that story. I think we've been going now for just about an hour.
Yeah, I was about to wrap things up. Yeah, I won't drag you out for too long. But Bob, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. What conventions can people find you at this year? I know you have a website I have linked down below and a Patreon.
My next convention, I'm going to be at Lexington Comic-Con next month. I'll be at Philadelphia Comic-Con. I'll be at Heroes Con.
Oh, I'll be at Heroes Con too. I'll meet you there.
Terrificon, Baltimore Con.
Great. I'll definitely be at Heroes, probably Terrificon as well. So I'll see you there. Everyone, make sure to give Bob your love. If you're interested at all, check out his Patreon, check out his website, say hi to him at a con, and obviously check out his work. Thank you so much, Bob. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you guys for watching. If you're interested, subscribe to my channel and keep an eye out. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
All right. Okay, you too.